On the morning of my graduation, while everyone was busy celebrating my degree, I slipped out quietly to handle something that no one else knew about. Most people would have spent that day soaking in applause and taking pictures. I, however, was walking down the quiet hallway of my grandparents' estate, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 23, freshly graduated with honors in finance, and I have always been meticulous about planning for the future. That morning, dressed in my cap and gown, I carried a folder that could change the dynamics of my entire family. My grandparents, who had always been my greatest support and the ones who truly understood me, had left behind an estate worth over $2 million. To me, it wasn't just money, it was a symbol of love, trust, and security. But I had learned early that money can reveal the worst in people. My parents, Diane and Richard Carter, were always competitive, ambitious, and a little impatient. They believed wealth was a right, not a privilege. They had a habit of taking what they wanted, justifying it as family entitlement. My older sister, Melissa, was the type who flaunted her accomplishments, craving attention and validation from anyone who would listen. She adored showing off her designer clothes, her fancy dinners, and her ability to get whatever she wanted with a few manipulative words. For years, I had watched quietly, realizing that when the inevitable inheritance conversations began, it would be a battlefield. My grandparents knew this too. They had always trusted me with small responsibilities, letting me handle their financial decisions in subtle ways, testing me, teaching me. It was during these moments that they hinted that I should always be cautious, that money could bring out the worst in even the closest family members. So, while everyone else was celebrating, I took action. I had spent months preparing, learning about trusts, legal maneuvers, and financial safeguards. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not Melissa. I knew if I had mentioned it, they would have interfered, criticized, or outright tried to take control. The last thing I wanted was for greed to overshadow the memories of my grandparents. I walked into my grandparents' study. The room smelled of old wood, polished leather, and faint traces of their favorite coffee. It felt comforting yet solemn. I opened the safe, took out the necessary documents, and began the process of transferring the $2 million estate into a trust under my name as trustee. I double-checked every signature, every clause, ensuring that the funds would be secure and that my grandparents' wishes would be honored. Every keystroke, every signature, felt like a silent rebellion. It wasn't about defiance for the sake of it, it was about foresight, about making sure their hard-earned wealth wouldn't be swallowed up by entitlement. I could hear faint voices from the party outside, laughter, congratulations, and champagne corks popping. But in that room, there was only me, a pen, and the weight of responsibility. I knew the moment I moved the estate into a trust, the game would change. It wasn't just money, it was power, and I now had control of something my parents would never expect. Diane and Richard prided themselves on their influence, on their ability to orchestrate and manipulate. But here, quietly, I had taken the upper hand. I felt a rush of satisfaction, tempered by a whisper of guilt. Was I overstepping? Or was this simply protecting what was rightfully meant to stay safe? Melissa, my sister, had no idea. She had been too busy checking her reflection in the mirror, making plans for her next Instagram post. I imagined her reaction if she found out: shock, indignation, maybe even tears, not for the estate itself, but for the control they had thought they held over everything. I packed up the last of the documents and placed them in a secure location, accessible only to me. The trust was officially in place. I allowed myself a small smile. For once, I felt in control of the chaos that often surrounded our family. As I returned to the celebration, my parents greeted me with the usual pride-laden smiles. They had no idea what I had done. To them, everything seemed normal, just another day to pat me on the back and speak of my promising future. I walked among them, outwardly cheerful, but inside, my mind was racing. I had planted a seed, and I knew it would grow in ways they could never anticipate. Little did I know, this quiet action, this careful safeguarding of the estate, would ignite a series of events that none of us could foresee. The trust was more than a financial maneuver, it was a spark that would test loyalty, greed, and the very foundation of our family relationships. By the end of that day, I had realized something important. Sometimes, protecting what matters most means acting quietly, strategically, and without expectation of recognition. And sometimes, the most powerful moves are the ones no one sees coming. That night, as I lay in bed reflecting on the day, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief that I had secured my grandparents' legacy, anticipation for what was to come. My parents might suspect, they might probe, but they would never guess the depth of planning and foresight that had gone into this. For now, the estate was safe, and I had learned the first lesson of wealth and family: control is as much about subtlety as it is about power. A few weeks after I quietly moved my grandparents' $2 million estate into a trust, everything seemed calm on the surface. My parents had been unusually quiet about the inheritance, perhaps believing that the estate would eventually come under their control once I matured enough to hand it over. Melissa, my sister, remained her usual self, focused on social media, shopping sprees, and attending lavish parties. But I knew better than to be lulled into a false sense of security. The first warning came subtly. One evening, Diane called me into the living room under the guise of family discussion. At first, her tone was casual, almost affectionate. "Emily, we've been thinking. You're responsible, but maybe it's time we talked about the estate. Your grandparents would have wanted it to stay in the family." I nodded politely, masking the tension building inside me. My heart raced as I listened, careful not to reveal any hint of the trust I had established. I knew their suggestion wasn't about responsibility, it was a test, an attempt to gauge my reaction and perhaps intimidate me into compliance. Richard, ever the domineering figure, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with that smug look he often wore when he believed he had the upper hand. "You know, Emily," he said, "handling such a large sum at your age can be risky. It might be better if we guided you." His words were sweet in tone but laced with condescension. I could see the gears turning in their minds, imagining scenarios where they could wrest control from me. Melissa, sensing an opportunity for drama, chimed in with an exaggerated sigh. "I just don't understand why you're being so secretive, Emily. It's family money, after all." Her eyes sparkled with mischief, and I knew she was already calculating how she could turn this into her advantage, perhaps by playing the poor, overlooked sister while trying to worm her way into access. I smiled softly, keeping my composure. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm following my grandparents' wishes exactly as they intended." My words were calm, but inside, I was bracing for the storm I knew was inevitable. The next few days brought more subtle alarms. Emails meant for me were mysteriously forwarded to Melissa's account. Phone calls from lawyers and advisors were suddenly misdirected to my parents. It became clear that someone in the household was testing boundaries, trying to uncover the hidden estate. One evening, while reviewing documents at my desk, I noticed a change in the login attempts to my online trust account. Someone had tried accessing it, someone with intimate knowledge of the family finances. My stomach sank. It was the first concrete evidence that my parents and perhaps Melissa were probing, quietly but persistently, to figure out what I had done. I began observing them more closely. Diane lingered longer in my study than usual, asking seemingly innocent questions about my post-graduation plans. Richard started dropping casual comments about responsibility and making wise decisions. And Melissa, with her sly little smiles, seemed to be watching for any sign of frustration or fear. I knew I couldn't confront them directly yet. The moment I revealed my knowledge, they would become defensive, manipulative, and possibly take drastic actions. So, I remained outwardly calm, all the while documenting their behaviors, noting the patterns, and planning my next moves. The tension grew when my parents unexpectedly invited me to a family dinner. They insisted it was casual, but I felt the underlying purpose, an attempt to corner me in a social setting where I couldn't easily protect the estate. I prepared myself mentally, knowing that every word I spoke would be scrutinized. During dinner, Diane's questions became pointed. "Emily, don't you think it's time you consider what's best for everyone in the family?" she asked, forcing me to choose my words carefully. Richard added, "We only want what's fair. You wouldn't want to make a mistake handling so much money alone, right?" Melissa smirked, her fork tapping against her plate like a ticking clock. I could almost hear her thoughts. "I bet she's hiding something, and I'm going to find out what it is." I kept my composure, sipping my water and nodding in acknowledgement without giving away a hint of my secret. My heart pounded, but I refused to show any weakness. This was the first real battle, and I wasn't going to lose it. After the dinner, the subtle probing continued. Phone calls became more frequent, and casual reminders about family responsibility turned into almost thinly veiled threats. It was clear my parents were testing my limits, waiting to see if I would falter. Yet, amid the tension, I noticed small opportunities. Their overconfidence made them careless. Diane accidentally left a sensitive document out on the counter one afternoon, one that revealed her and Richard's plan to petition for control of the estate. Melissa, in her eagerness to uncover my secret, had made a series of comments online that could be traced back to her curiosity about my finances. I realized I needed to be strategic. This wasn't just about defending the $2 million estate, it was about proving that I could navigate family greed and manipulation without giving in. And more importantly, it was about teaching them a lesson they would never forget, that underestimating me was their first mistake. That week, as I reflected on the events, I felt a surge of determination. I would not let anyone, even my parents, compromise the trust my grandparents had entrusted to me. I understood that their probing was just the beginning, the first tremor before the real quake. Little did they know, their every move was being watched, recorded in my mind, and catalogued for the right moment. And I was preparing for that moment, a moment when the power would shift, and the quiet graduate who had taken the $2 million estate into a trust would show just how formidable she could be. Everything I had suspected about my family's intentions came crashing down one morning. I woke up to a flurry of notifications on my phone, bank alerts, email warnings, and unexpected messages from my legal advisor. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. Someone had tried to manipulate the estate, and if it weren't for the trust, the $2 million my grandparents had left me could have been at risk. I rushed to my home office, my hands trembling. Each message I opened revealed more about their attempts: fake signatures, unauthorized access attempts, and misleading calls to my lawyer. Richard had the audacity to send a friendly email pretending to negotiate, while Diane subtly threatened consequences if I didn't comply. Even Melissa, in her characteristic naivety, had been probing online accounts, looking for anything to tip her in my favor. I sank into my chair, feeling a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. The betrayal stung deeply, not just because they tried to take what wasn't theirs, but because these were the people I had trusted most in life. My grandparents had always warned me about greed in the family, but I hadn't realized just how far my parents and sister would go to claim what they thought was theirs. I remembered the mornings in their house, the smiles and seemingly innocent questions that masked their true intentions. Every comment, every suggestion about sharing the responsibility now made sense. I had walked right into a minefield, and the first blast had just gone off. As I pieced together the evidence, I felt my emotions spiraling: frustration, fear, and heartbreak all at once. I took deep breaths, forcing myself to stay calm. If I let anger take over, I could make mistakes. But I couldn't ignore the violation either. My trust had been tested, my boundaries crossed, and my patience pushed to its limit. The situation escalated quickly over the next few days. My parents started subtly pressuring me in public, making pointed comments when we were out together. "Emily, surely you understand family comes first," Diane said at a brunch gathering. Richard added, "We only want what's fair. Why make things complicated?" Their polite words were like daggers, cutting through the calm I had tried so hard to maintain. Melissa, ever the opportunist, began hinting at my secretive ways on social media, sharing veiled posts about fairness and responsibility that quickly drew attention. I realized they were trying to isolate me, to create social pressure that might push me into giving up the trust. Their plan was clever, coordinated, and emotionally manipulative. But in the midst of the storm, a small detail caught my attention, a mistake they had made. While reviewing the unauthorized access attempts, I noticed an IP address linked to Melissa's devices. It wasn't a major clue, but it was enough to prove that their probing had left digital fingerprints. And Diane had left a folder on the kitchen counter one morning, one that outlined their intentions in plain language. That was my spark of hope. The first tangible sign that they were not as careful as they believed. They thought I was naive, inexperienced, and unlikely to catch on. They underestimated me, a mistake that would soon cost them dearly. I decided to bide my time. Every word I spoke, every interaction I had, was carefully measured. I pretended to be unaware, allowing them to continue their attempts, while I gathered proof and documented every misstep. Their confidence grew with each passing day, which only strengthened my position. Meanwhile, the emotional toll was heavy. I felt isolated, betrayed by the people who were supposed to be my guides and supporters. Nights were restless. I replayed every conversation, every look, every seemingly innocent question that now carried sinister undertones. The weight of responsibility felt crushing, but it also fueled my determination. I knew that confronting them prematurely could backfire. Instead, I focused on collecting evidence, digital logs, copies of emails, and records of unauthorized attempts. Each piece of proof was like a puzzle piece, slowly revealing the bigger picture of their plot. And I kept a journal, documenting their every move, so I could ensure that nothing was missed. By the end of the week, I had enough evidence to show that their actions were deliberate. It was more than just curiosity or concern, it was manipulation, greed, and betrayal. And as I stared at the compiled records, a plan began to form in my mind. Not a plan of confrontation yet, but a blueprint for reclaiming control, for turning their underestimation into their downfall. I felt a rush of empowerment, knowing that the first wave of their attack had failed. I had seen the cracks in their strategy, and I was ready to exploit them. The trust my grandparents had allowed me to create was not just a safeguard for the $2 million estate, it was a shield for my autonomy, my independence, and my dignity. The betrayal had been shocking, but it also revealed their weaknesses. They were confident, arrogant, and careless, traits that I could now use to my advantage. Their overconfidence would be their undoing, and my quiet vigilance had given me the edge. As I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the fading sunlight, I knew the next phase was coming. The confrontation was inevitable, and I would be prepared. I wasn't just defending the estate anymore, I was reclaiming my place in the family, asserting my independence, and proving that underestimating me was a grave mistake. And deep down, a sense of anticipation grew. The storm was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. I had the upper hand, and the next move would be mine. The real battle was just beginning. The moment I had been waiting for had arrived. After days of careful observation, collecting digital evidence, and documenting every move my parents and sister had made, I finally felt ready to act. The betrayal that had once left me shaken now fueled a cold determination. I wasn't just going to protect the estate, I was going to make them face the consequences of their greed and arrogance. I started by securing every loose thread. Every email, every unauthorized login attempt, every attempt at persuasion, It was all compiled into a comprehensive dossier. My lawyer was brought in, not as a weapon, but as a shield. I knew that any misstep could be twisted against me, so I moved with precision. Every detail was double-checked, every claim verified. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, and I wanted it airtight. Then came the plan. I began subtly confronting them, one by one, planting seeds of doubt. Diane received a friendly but firm email requesting clarification on certain family contributions regarding the estate. Melissa's social media posts were carefully documented, and private messages were saved to reveal her attempts to manipulate public perception. Richard, ever the negotiator, was met with polite but unwavering resistance. I let them think they were still in control, that I was naive, unaware, and hesitant. Their overconfidence was delicious. A week later, I invited them all over under the guise of a casual family dinner. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread, completely normal, unassuming, nothing hinted at the storm about to break. They arrived, confident and smug, unaware that the quiet, obedient granddaughter they had underestimated was about to take the stage. I started subtly, mentioning how I had been reviewing the estate documents and asking casual questions about their assistance in managing the finances. Diane laughed, brushing it off, while Richard offered half-hearted reassurances. Melissa tried to interject with a nervous smile. I let them talk, letting their arrogance and slip-ups pile up naturally. Each word they spoke added to the web of evidence I had meticulously prepared. When dessert was served, I casually opened my laptop at the table. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice calm but deliberate. "It seems some people might have been overstepping their bounds regarding the estate." Their smiles faltered ever so slightly, a flicker of unease passing through their expressions. Then came the reveal. I calmly navigated through the documents, emails, and screenshots, presenting the timeline of their manipulations. "These are your attempts to access accounts without authorization," I said, pointing to a series of emails and login attempts. "And this," I continued, showing Melissa's social media posts and private messages, "shows attempts to influence perception and manipulate opinions." Diane's face turned pale. "Emily. That's not what it looks like," she stammered. Richard's usual smug demeanor cracked, and Melissa's nervousness was palpable. They had underestimated me, assumed I would comply or stay silent. But now, exposed, they had nowhere to hide. I paused for effect, letting the silence stretch. Every second added weight to the realization, their plot had failed, and I had orchestrated it perfectly. The power shift was complete. I was no longer the passive observer. I was in control, and I had turned their greed into their downfall. "Since my grandparents entrusted me with this estate, I've taken every precaution to protect it," I said firmly, locking eyes with each of them in turn. "I didn't do this to punish anyone unnecessarily, but actions have consequences. And your actions," I gestured to the evidence, "speak for themselves." Diane tried to argue, but the legal implications were clear, the proof undeniable. Richard attempted to negotiate, but I had anticipated every move. Melissa, realizing her naivety had been exploited by her own parents, could only sit in stunned silence. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had completely shifted. The dinner table, once a scene of casual family camaraderie, had transformed into a courtroom of sorts. The roles were reversed. I was the arbiter of justice, and they were powerless to contest the evidence I presented. In the following days, their attempts to contest or manipulate the situation were met with firm legal resistance. The trust my grandparents had allowed me to establish was invulnerable, and my documentation left no room for ambiguity. They were forced to acknowledge that I had acted within my rights, and any further attempts at coercion would have severe consequences. The emotional satisfaction of this victory was profound. It wasn't just about money or property, it was about asserting my autonomy, reclaiming respect, and proving that I would not be undermined. The fear and shock I had once felt were replaced with a sense of empowerment and liberation. And yet, amidst the satisfaction, I realized this was more than just a personal triumph. It was a lesson in resilience, vigilance, and strategic thinking. I had learned to navigate the complexities of family dynamics, the subtle manipulations of those closest to me, and the importance of protecting what was rightfully mine. By the end of the month, I had regained complete control over the estate. My parents and sister, humbled and wary, had no further influence over my decisions. The family gatherings, once tense and fraught with unspoken intentions, were now approached with caution on their part and confidence on mine. I had transformed the betrayal into an opportunity, not only preserving my inheritance but strengthening my independence and self-assurance. Every step had been calculated, every move intentional. And while the emotional scars remained, the lesson was clear: vigilance, preparation, and patience are the most powerful tools in the face of deceit. As I closed my laptop one evening, reflecting on the events that had unfolded, I felt a profound sense of closure. The storm had passed, and I had emerged not just unscathed, but triumphant. The trust, the planning, and the meticulous execution of my strategy had ensured that my grandparents' legacy remained protected, and that those who sought to exploit it had faced the consequences of their actions. The sweetest revenge, I realized, was not in confrontation or anger, but in calculated, undeniable victory. And I had achieved it. The days following the dramatic dinner unfolded with an almost surreal calm. My parents and sister, once confident and controlling, became cautious and restrained. They no longer tried to influence my decisions or challenge the trust I had established. The fear of exposure and accountability had humbled them in ways I never expected. It was both satisfying and bittersweet. Seeing people you love and grew up with reduced to uncertainty is never without emotional weight. I spent time reflecting on everything that had happened. The meticulous planning, the collection of evidence, and the confrontation had taught me invaluable lessons about human nature, family dynamics, and personal resilience. My grandparents' trust in me had not only preserved their estate but had also revealed my own strength and capability. For the first time, I felt an unshakable sense of autonomy, not just financially, but emotionally. Managing the trust became a daily routine of careful oversight, but now with confidence rather than fear. I consulted my lawyer regularly, keeping every transaction transparent and above reproach. I also began to invest the estate in projects that mattered to me: scholarships for underprivileged students, small businesses in my community, and sustainable ventures that reflected my values. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about creating a legacy that honored my grandparents' memory and my own principles. Family interactions, however, remained complicated. My parents and sister avoided directly discussing the estate, often retreating to polite but distant conversations. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of resentment in their eyes, but I no longer feared or reacted to it. Instead, I maintained boundaries, allowing them access only when it was legally or morally appropriate. It was a delicate balance of compassion and caution, but one that felt empowering. Emotionally, I experienced a mix of relief, satisfaction, and subtle grief. While I had protected what was mine and asserted my independence, I also mourned the loss of trust and uncomplicated family bonds. The betrayal had cut deep, and some wounds remained tender. Yet, I recognized that these experiences had shaped me into a stronger, wiser, and more discerning person. I no longer allowed naivety or blind loyalty to compromise my well-being. Over time, I also noticed subtle changes in how I viewed relationships and trust. I became more attentive to intentions, more cautious about unsolicited advice, and more deliberate in decisions involving personal or financial matters. This vigilance was not paranoia, it was a necessary safeguard born from experience. My grandparents' wisdom had prepared me to act decisively, and their legacy had become a beacon guiding my choices. In the months that followed, I received unexpected apologies. My parents and sister, privately and awkwardly, acknowledged their missteps, expressing regret for their actions. I accepted them with grace but made it clear that boundaries were non-negotiable. Forgiveness did not mean erasing lessons learned, it meant acknowledging growth while protecting my own future. Their words brought a sense of closure but not full reconciliation, and I was content with that. The estate itself flourished under my management. Investments grew, philanthropic initiatives expanded, and the trust became a source of empowerment not only for me but for others who benefited from my decisions. Each success reinforced the idea that vigilance, patience, and strategic action could transform betrayal into opportunity. I had turned a potentially destructive situation into a platform for growth, impact, and personal triumph. Looking back, I realized the greatest lessons were not about money, control, or revenge, though those elements were undeniably satisfying, but about self-respect, foresight, and courage. I learned that trust is a responsibility, not a privilege, and that standing firm in one's principles can protect both legacy and self. I learned that betrayal, though painful, can reveal hidden strengths and catalyze personal evolution. And I learned that victory, when carefully executed and rooted in integrity, is the sweetest form of justice. As I settled into this new chapter of life, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I had honored my grandparents, protected what was rightfully mine, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. The drama, the confrontation, and the tension had been intense, but every moment served as a lesson in resilience and determination. And so, I carry forward with clarity and confidence, aware of the risks, prepared for challenges, and committed to a future shaped by my own choices. I understand now that life's trials are not just tests of patience or endurance, but opportunities to assert control, demonstrate wisdom, and build a legacy that truly reflects who we are. In the end, the trust I established was more than a legal instrument, it was a statement. A statement that I am capable, vigilant, and unyielding. A statement that respect, integrity, and careful planning can outmaneuver greed, manipulation, and entitlement. And most importantly, a statement that I am the author of my own destiny. So, to anyone facing similar challenges with family, inheritance, or betrayal, document everything, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of preparation. Stand firm, act decisively, and let integrity guide you. The outcome may not always be predictable, but your dignity, independence, and clarity of purpose will remain intact. And if my parents or sister are watching this, thank you for showing me exactly why foresight, patience, and courage are worth every effort.